Thank you so much for joining our webinar. I'm going to welcome my fellow panelists on camera as we take some time to just set the table for our conversation today and allow a few more minutes for folks to transition. Fun fact, this is a record-breaking webinar for OneGoal. So we had over 300 RSVPs, which to me is just one more signal that now is the time for all of us across the sector to embrace the idea of quality pathways for all students. So excited to engage in a conversation today about some of the questions that literally I wake up thinking about every single day. What is it going to take to make sure that all students, not some, know who they are, where they're going, and who's going to help them get there? And trust me when I tell you, we have some real experts in this space who have different lenses in the work coming together today for what I know will be a rigorous conversation about just what it's going to take for all of us to come together to take on this work together. Thank you again for joining in a way to sort of buy us time, but also just share a little bit more about myself and our work. Again, my name is Melissa Connelly. I'm the CEO of OneGoal. I have been for the last 7 years, but I'm actually about to enter my 13th year with OneGoal. Prior to that, I was a teacher on the south side of Chicago. I founded a school, Brownsville Lighthouse Charter School, back in 2006. And it was such an incredible blessing to be part of a founding school team right at the same time that Chicago Public Schools was on the front page of the Tribune for not so great reasons at that moment. We, as a city, had to collectively confront the reality that at the time we were sharing a statistic of 6 out of every 100 Chicago Public Schools students earning a degree, credential, or certificate by age 25. The good news is, since then, we have seen Chicago Public Schools be one of the fastest improving districts in the country, especially as it pertains to post-secondary attainment. And it has been an honor and a privilege to be an educator in Chicago and watch that improvement, watch that growth. I will say that the other component of this that brings me to this conversation beyond the lens of an educator is just the lived experience I have as a first generation college graduate myself. So for those of you that are joining us that know me well, you probably also have heard the name Ms. Jeter more than once. Ms. Jeter is my why when I think about why I am here. She was a social worker that was assigned to me as part of a truancy program. And I was lucky enough that she didn't just see herself as a social worker. She also saw herself as a partner to me in planning for my future. And so in addition to navigating all of the things that I was working to navigate on the home and life front, she pushed me academically to think about what path I could be on that would go beyond high school and truly prepared me to answer the question, what did I want to be when I grew up? And was there for me when I faced the many obstacles I inevitably had to overcome to get there. And so this webinar, and honestly, my career is coming to you in her honor more than anything else. I learned so much about the kind of support that young people need from the kind of support that I received from her. And have been on a journey ever since to try and make sure that that is a reality for all young people. So I have the wonderful privilege of helping to host, but more than anything, participate as a panelist throughout today's conversation. But before we jump in, I wanted to pass it to Stephen from OneGoal to just share a little bit about logistics for the webinar today.
Thanks, Melissa. Hey, everyone. I'll share some stuff in the chat here, but we have such a large number of attendees today that we're going to keep the discussion really focused by leveraging the Q&A feature to help you engage with our panelists. So we'll try our best to answer any questions you have during this discussion. And then the webinar will be recorded. We get that asked that a lot. So anyone registered will receive the recording along with other resources mentioned and shared during the webinar. And then we'll also share links to tools and material throughout the webinar. So make sure that you follow along in the chat. Back to you, Melissa.
Thanks so much, Stephen. So Many of you responded to the RSVP in part because you have read some of what we have shared in the report for the Commission on Purposeful Pathways that was released almost a month ago. We laid out research-backed actionable vision for how high schools can serve as a launch pad for student success. And it was really important as we came together as a commission that we thought about how do we not start from zero or assume that this work hasn't been happening for the last, couple of decades, but instead look across the field and try and cull the best practices that we are seeing to put forth a coherent, student-centered version of what we think high quality pathways look like. So hopefully you didn't take away that there was anything that you had never heard of or imagined. There was a lot of things that we weren't saying for the first time, but what we're really pushing on is a clear call to action that focuses on both integration and coherence. So you all likely saw this statistic that 78% of Gen Z students believe it's important to determine career plans before high school graduation. And yet, only 13% feel fully prepared to do so. As a mom of a senior and a sophomore, I recently had a conversation with my oldest and said, to what extent do you feel like you had what you need to choose your pathway? And what he said to me was a bit disheartening. He said, Mom, I am really proud of the work that I've done to clarify my pathway to Mizzou. And I feel somewhat confident that I'm choosing a career path that I know will exist. But the reality is I still feel like I had to do largely most of this on my own, maybe with a little bit of help from you, although let me be very frank, he did not want help from his mom. And, he said very plainly that while I feel okay about where I am given the support that I received, I look across my peers and I see so many of them who this process of doing a lot of the work outside of the school day just didn't work for. And I feel like, sadly, they're getting left behind. And it was just a good reminder of what it means to close this gap that we're seeing between aspiration and reality for all kids, not some kids. And we're going to talk a lot more about what that's going to take from all of us today. So we came together with 21 commissioners. A few of the best of the best are here with us today. So I'm going to take a second just to introduce who is joining us. So first up, Kelly Kovacic Duran, who is our moderator for today's conversation. Kelly is the principal consultant at Education First. She and her team were the conveners of the commission. They were incredibly instrumental in producing the final report. I will also say that they were the chief at herding cats. So thank you to the entire Ed First community. As you can imagine, bringing together 21 people who are the best of the best was not an easy endeavor, but they did it beautifully. Next up is my friend and co-chair, Paul Herdman. So Paul is the president and CEO at Rodel Foundation of Delaware. He brought such great insights on the career-connected learning and valuable perspective on how to break down silos that are holding students back. We also have John Fink. I have been a fangirl of John's for some time. I read much of his literature before I had the opportunity to meet him as part of the commission, because he is senior researcher associate at the Community College Center or Research Center, which many of you affectionately call CCRC. John's experience in education research helped connect the dots and really make sure that we're not just looking at the data, but understanding the story behind the data. So thank you, John. And last, but certainly not least, we're joined by Dr. Lazaro Lopez, AKA affectionately known as Laz. He's the executive director of HSD 214 in Arlington Heights, Illinois. Laz is also the chair of the Illinois Community College Board. He's bringing many years of experience as a school leader, providing him with valuable insights from both the secondary and post-secondary perspectives. And I will just say very plainly, whenever somebody's like, okay, yeah, but how do you actually make this work? I point to Laz and his work. So he'll be able to walk us through some of that today. All right, with that, I will pass it to you, Kelly.
Great. Thanks, Melissa. It's so good to be here today and to be part of such an esteemed panel. So really looking forward to the conversation and being able to share more with you all about the resources and the report that the Commission put together. The commission, as Melissa noted earlier, was brought together with a cross-section of leaders across our country who are really focused on how do we build pathways where all students are able to thrive and thrive both in terms of feeling like they are following their purpose, but thriving also in terms of being on pathways that are going to lead to economic mobility. And what we made sure when we put this commission together is that it really reflected a cross section of different roles and actors in all of the systems that are responsible for making sure that these pathways are really strong. K-12, higher ed, intermediaries, employers. And also, we made sure that as part of the commission that we also had students who weren't just sort of at the table as a checkbox, but really were pushing our thinking and were active and equal members of the commission. And so what you will hear today represents the perspective and the voices of all of those stakeholders behind this vision, but also, as Melissa says, really builds on a lot of amazing and great work that partners across the country, many of you are on the call today, have been doing. Our full report, which we call a Launchpad for Life, talks about this key framework and conceptual framework that you see here that includes 6 really key components, all of which must be present for purposeful pathways. And as part of the key experiences, we identified 3 programmatic experiences that are really critical: high quality advising, accelerated course sequencing, and career connected learning. We could spend an hour talking about each of these individually and the importance of their integration. And so given that we only have an hour today, we're going to really double click on high quality advising and be focusing quite a bit on the importance of making sure that high quality advising is actually embedded into coursework. It's not a nice to have, it's a must have. But we will be talking about it in relationship also to these other components and ways in which you can embed advising, but do so in a way that is really aligned and coherent with academic or accelerated course sequencing, career connected learning, and then these cultivation of agency components of purpose, belonging, and social capital. What we know right now is that the reality of advising is just unsustainable. For any of you working in high schools or like Melissa and many of us on the phone that have either been counselors or have kids that are in high school right now, the current reality is that on average, there is 1 counselor for every 376 students. And so with that type of ratio, there is no way that a counselor can be expected or can be able to really deliver high quality advising that helps a young person really explore their purpose, what it is that they want to do, how it is that they build the networks of social support that are going to get them there. And so that is part of why it is so critical that we be thinking about how high quality advising can actually be integrated into the courses and the experiences that young people are having day in and day out with the other adults in their lives. And so we're going to go ahead and get started with our panel. One of the things that was really important in putting the materials together that the commission worked on is that it not just be another report that is sort of living on a shelf or in a PDF on someone's computer, but not actually being used. And so we really focused on how to create a vision, how to create resources, and how to create recommendations that have a lot of utility and help folks regardless of where they're starting. So the first question I want to pose to the group is here on this slide is really our call to action in terms of the immediate kind of first steps or ways in which you can start working towards building purposeful pathways for all students. And I'd love you each to pick one of these recommendations and talk about why it felt so important to include in the report and as part of the call to action that this commission is putting forward. And Paul, I'm going to start with you.
Well, welcome everyone. So I just wanted to also clarify just a little bit of my background because it informs my response to the prompt. One is Rodel is an education nonprofit that works to convene, connect, and scale transformational change in Delaware, but not just in Delaware, but around the country. I serve on the Workforce Development Board, so I'm working with employers. But probably most importantly, I have 3 kids in their 20s who are navigating what is a crazy world. And in the opening, there was one gap that was identified around this education gap. That is that 85% of good jobs over the next 5 or so years are going to require some education beyond high school. But there's probably a lesser known gap, which is an experience gap. And the OECD, this international research group, looked at 10 countries, including the US, over 10 years. And they looked at the same kids at 15 and 25. And what they realized is that young people today are more educated, but less experienced than their younger peers, their older peers rather. And as a result, are often 3 to 4 times more likely to be unemployed. So there's this education gap and experience gap. And the way folks are wrestling with this around the world is pretty different. So on one end of the spectrum, you have your apprenticeship countries like the Switzerland's, Germany's, where 80% of the kids are in an apprenticeship fairly early on. On the other end is the United States with a lot of the Commonwealth countries, where 80% of the kids are in comprehensive schools and 20% are in vocational. So the reality is that in the comprehensive schools, the goal tends to be college access, and career advising tends to be a bit better in those places. In the vocational schools, the work-based learning experience tends to be more developed. The partnerships with employers a bit more sophisticated. And you have this sort of bifurcated system. And I actually had an opportunity to go visit a number of Commonwealth countries over the last couple of years, countries similar to ours. And there's this common thread where there's a blending of the head and the hand, that there needs to be a situation where we're designing schools where there isn't this bifurcation, where all students have access to the college and educational experiences they want. That could be an apprenticeship, and they have a meaningful work-based learning experience. So as we look at this complex world, to address those dual gaps of education and experience, we need to create a system that enables all students to access both equally.
Thanks, Paul. Melissa, we'll turn to you next.
Yeah, and I have to just comment on one thing that Paul shared. When Paul shared a version of what he just described at one of our many commission meetings, it struck me like to my core, because I realized that in the same way, growing up being a truant kid, there aren't truant kids and kids who have access to regular courses. I'm a whole human being, and I remember feeling that label and being tracked as such. And so when Paul reflected back that in the same way that we can't have kids who are truant kids and kids who are advanced kids, or we can't have college kids or trade kids, kids are kids. And they all deserve access to purposeful, high quality pathways. And so again, thank you, Paul, for making that such a clear component of our work. So I would love to speak to just the charge for all of us to take on the work that is hardwiring purpose, belonging, and social capital into every pathway. I know most of you are joining this webinar because you know a bit about OneGoal or our current OneGoal partner, or maybe future OneGoal partner. But just to share a little bit about our work, for the last 20 years, we have been doing work to create a cohort model inside classrooms that is part of the master schedule, so part of the school day where kids are earning credit to go through this experience of planning for their future. And I think the part of that experience that I felt like we were the best in the world at, and I was profoundly proud of, was this component of belonging. You would go to any OneGoal classroom and you would hear the word family multiple times. And so in so many ways, for 20 years, we were hitting that out of the ballpark. In 2017, when I became Chief Program Officer after doing a lot of work on the regional team in Chicago, we wanted to look at what was the difference between students who had made it to a pathway, in many ways like the pathway that we thought, especially mathematically, was ideal for that student because they had a good chance of completion. and weren't finishing relative to students who were. And we were at that point, a good 10 plus years into our efforts, so had enough of a sample size to really try and understand what was different. We coded more than 100 qualitative interviews with students who had stopped out or been pushed out of their post-secondary pathways. And very quickly, when coding that data, we saw a theme. The vast majority of students who had been pushed off or stopped out of their educational pathway said something that sounded like, I woke up one day and I couldn't tell you why I was doing it. I couldn't tell you why I was at school. And I was making all of these sacrifices. I had to pay for the money it was going to take me to get on the bus to go to the classes. I was missing out on work that day. I had to figure out childcare and I couldn't tell you why. And I literally get goosebumps when I take myself back to that moment where we had that revelation and we realized that the way in which we thought about purpose up to that point in time was insufficient. And that if we weren't deeply rooting the decisions about a young person's future in their individual purpose and they weren't feeling deeply convicted on it, then we were really only an access play and not a success play. And so I cannot say enough how much this work has to be intentionally designed into the experiences. Otherwise, we can check all the right boxes of making sure students fill out a financial aid form or making sure students select an institution or a specific trade. But if it's not the one that they feel deeply convicted about, then the chances that they will be successful on it are diminished. And we owe them more than that.
Thanks, Melissa. Laz, if you can sort of build from what Paul and Melissa have shared to talk about which of these recommendations really stood out to you.
Certainly. Thanks, Kelly. Thank you, everyone. So I'm going to focus really on moving the goalposts. And really, as a former high school principal, I recall being very agnostic as to what happened to students after high school graduation, that as long as, they graduated high school and went on to college or got a job, then the school was successful. But what we learned quickly was that doesn't necessarily translate into long-term economic mobility and life-sustaining wages. And in reality, I knew that we had at least one higher ed institution where students, only about 1 in 4 persisted to graduation there. At a college, and that it wasn't enough, and to be agnostic, and that we had to really rethink what was our real endpoint. And in fact, in that community, we had families that were moving out prior to actually stepping foot on the high school. So the first determination I had to make in practical matters and related to this recommendation number 3 was really recognizing that graduation wasn't the endpoint for our community, and that we had to look at what happened to students. And I set the bar 6 years out because that's where we could get data, particularly for higher ed, and see if students do go on a college campus, are they still persisting after year 1? And are we relevant to our community and to the neighborhood that our students are going to be graduating into? What are the industries here that we can connect directly to so that students see opportunities locally? And it mattered to not only build that relevance, but also build those purposeful connections with the employers and the higher ed institutions that were accessible and a reach for the students, so that we can help them explore and get them on solid footing to be able to take advantage of those opportunities when they list us.
Thanks, Laz. And last but certainly not least, John.
Thanks. And it's so impressive, that vision, Laz, from D214. And I think it sort of speaks to this broader kind of movement towards thinking about value and sort of what's the value of post-secondary. Many community college leaders now are thinking, completion is not enough. What is happening after completion? And the fourth finding is really about shared responsibility. Just, I think, recognizes that, we've been sort of split up into these different sectors, and a lot of students get caught in between them. But if we want to serve students well, it really is a collective impact. It takes collective action and partnerships across the sectors. And And, it's really, I think what was really compelling about this, so I researched community colleges. We study a lot of dual enrollment because high school students are now like a fifth of community college students. And so there is this sort of blurring of the lines that's happening. But I think this is so compelling, coming from that vantage point when just learning about like all of the related work happening in high school based, like high quality advising in the high school setting or CTE programs, career connected learning. And that I think that the folks implementing dual enrollment programs have a lot to benefit from those partnerships and that sort of, taking that shared action with those partners. So I think, it is sort of like to do it well, to serve students across these transitions. I think what we're seeing is that it does cost more. There are more resources needed to like take the time to develop and build those partnerships. But at the same time, there are clear incentives, really strong incentives from everybody's perspective to do it well. And so I think there's this opportunity to have this like enlightened self-interest of, we can do more if we do it together and better serve the students. And this is what we're hearing a lot from community college leaders is that, the serving the mission case is really actually the best for the bottom line too. And so I think that's a powerful force that's also working in favor of students.
Great. Thank you all for getting us started with those 4 sort of bold calls to action and recommendations. And in a minute, we're going to sort of double click and really get into how do you implement this? How do you actually do this really well? And I'll just reiterate that as we all were working as a commission and as we were doing a lot of field engagement throughout the development of this report and these materials, the thing we just consistently heard, and I think we all know as well as practitioners and leaders in the field, is that a vision is great, but it all comes down to implementation. And so it was really critical as a design principle in putting this together that we thought a lot about how do you take a vision and actually give people enough specificity that they can take where they are and think about what's that first next step I can take to be able to make progress. And so, John, in that spirit, your research at CCRC, it's a tongue twister, really highlights that transition between high school to college. And you spoke a little bit about that in just a minute or just recently. And one of the things that your research really highlights is how significant the gaps are in that transition and that handoff. And so drawing on your work at CCRC and the conversations and the work that you're doing alongside districts and community colleges in particular across the country, what are the primary levers that school districts and community colleges should and can pull to build these really integrated, scalable transitions and on-ramps for young people?
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. And I think a key thing you saw it in the visual from the report is just about the integration of all these things that are already happening, like, advising the high school setting, advanced placement courses, IB or CTE programs, or dual enrollment, taking college courses, and just the sort of opportunity to weave those all together with a focus on the student's purpose and belonging. And what I think was really appealing hearing those recommendations is that a lot of folks that are partnering right now to implement dual enrollment programs where high school students are taking college courses, most of this is through partnerships with the community college across the country, but it happens in all post-secondary sectors, is that the folks are trying to like grow those programs, but also addressing key challenges that a lot of times students are shut out from those programs. There's this phrase like programs of privilege that, we see that there's gaps in access by race and income and other factors. And so they're trying to close gaps. Folks running those programs are also trying to address this other phrase, the random acts of dual enrollment, that, oftentimes there's not a lot of planning of like how the course aligns to what the students are interested in. Do they have an adult that they're having a conversation with, be that a counselor or a college advisor? And maybe it might seem separate than another related experience, like if they're in a career academy in the high school. And so I think that a lot of the sort of world of improving and strengthening dual enrollment programs really aligns to these related efforts that the commission spoke about. So, what we see this looks like in practice is first off addressing the sort of programs of privilege challenge, which is very intentional, like disaggregation of data, who are the underrepresented populations, and what are the schools that don't have as robust dual enrollment programs, and really like how do dual enrollment complement AP and other courses instead of compete with, so that more students are getting that sort of accelerated offering. And then doing that sort of expanded outreach to sort of, work in barrier, addressing the barriers to things like eligibility criteria, high school GPA, to, close the gaps while at the same time increasing supports so that students are successful in those classes. And then the second thing that they're doing is addressing the random acts part, which is about not just the alignment of the courses and how this connects to career pathways or transfer pathways in the local area, but importantly, like that advising piece. And this, I think, is an important shared responsibility. We see when it's done well, there's college advising, like from college employees partnering with school employees that are working together to advise students and dual enrollment students. And that requires effort because there's like, well, what are the conversations you're going to have versus we're going to have? But what's, I think, encouraging is for school counselors and school advisors that are, just like dealing with high caseloads themselves and a lot to do, this actually can be a way where, the college stepping in can be an additional resource. Actually, having, for example, we're seeing more cases where there's a college advisor in the high school building like once a week or once every other week that becomes like a trusted face. So it really can have this like shared responsibility, and really kind of increase the amount of resources, specifically for advising to help students kind of have a sense of where they're headed.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, John. And again, those examples just really underscore that shared responsibility, as you noted. And Paul, in the work that you've been doing, both nationally, but with Rodel's focus on Delaware, you have played this intermediary role, and in that role are really helping to navigate and convene the different partners that need to be at the table. So not just K-12 and higher ed, but also employers. And Laz, you spoke about earlier sort of the importance of moving the goalposts. And even, as a principal, you used to think about, well, graduating from high school is enough. And recognizing that no, actually, economic mobility and looking at data years after a young person has graduated from high school is really critical. And so, Paul, I'm curious, as you've navigated the complexities of scaling purposeful pathways across an entire state, what do you see as some of the important incentives for getting the different systems and different actors that need to be working together to be incentivized to shift these goalposts and North Star?
Sure. And I think it goes back to John's point about the system being somewhat siloed, and we just have to figure out how do you kind of close those gaps. We were in an interesting situation at the tail end of the economic crisis. We saw some major companies saying, we don't have the talent we need, and we may be leaving. And Delaware is a small state, and if a major employer left, that would have been devastating. And so what we did, and this is sort of thinking about those incentives, about what would drive us, is that we talked to our governor, Jack Markell, at the time, and he said, like, who's doing a better job of really connecting those dots? And so our youth unemployment rate had gone up to 20%, 1 in 5 kids, and that was really kind of the national average. But in places like Switzerland, it was really closer to 7% before and after the economic crisis, in 2009. And so we started to look there, and we were able to take one pilot of 27 students at William Penn High School, which is about 15 minutes from where I am sitting right now. And it was a partnership between our community college, Delaware Tech, and one advanced manufacturing firm. And they got 3 kids. There are 3 things that kids normally don't get at this large high school, which is they get meaningful work-based learning experience, a heavy internship. They get up to 15 college credits, and they get a national certification. And just as a quick aside on that particular first pilot, I remember going to visit and talking to these kids, and there was this kid who was just really fired up. He had a couple of tats, and he was just sort of, just really into this advanced manufacturing, electronics, et cetera. And I actually went back and talked to the principal at the main high school because he was at a training center. And I was talking about this particular kid, and he's like, he described him a bit more, and he goes, I was about to kick that kid out. And the reality is that kid ended up not only finishing the program, He ended up going to community college and then getting a job in advanced manufacturing, and he's doing just fine. We were able to take that pilot with many other players from 27 to 30,000 students, or about 75% of all high school kids in Delaware over the last decade or so. And the structure as to how to do this, and this gets to the incentives, I think, as well, is that initially we brought together a mix of employers, and this is what foundations can do pretty well, is convene people, employers, Department of Ed folks, Department of Labor, district folks, community college and higher ed broadly, and said, let's put together a 10-year vision, because this is going to take more than one political cycle to solve. And we produced a document called C 2035, or Student Equity and Excellence 2035. And we then said, how do we get there? And initially it was really just a cross-section of middle managers in those various public and private sectors getting together, led by one person in particular who was at the Department of Ed, Luke Ryan at the time, really just working through how do you kind of pull this together. And I would say the last thing in terms of how the incentives got aligned at the very beginning is that we worked to look at the regulations of all the reporting across the different funding streams, Department of Labor, Education, et cetera, and align them so that district folks could report against all these different funding streams against the same metrics. And that way they could parade those resources in a way that could help them scale. And I think that piece in particular was really helpful. There's a deeper case study that Bellwether did, particularly that part of the strategy. But this notion of moving towards economic mobility is a huge piece of what we're trying to do. Still a lot of work to do, but I sit on the Workforce Development Board, as I said, and there's a much more coherent connection at this point about how those different silos interface.
Thanks, Paul. And Laz, I want to bring a similar question to you, particularly similar to Paul. You both are working at a very local level, being a superintendent of District 214, but also sit and chair the Illinois Community College Board. And Paul was talking a bit about the incentives that are important for moving those goalposts, really incentivizing cross collaboration. I have heard you on many occasions note that if a student chooses nothing, the world is going to choose for them. And so one of the things that you hold yourself accountable to, you hold your systems accountable to, is making sure that they are designed in ways that ensure students don't have the world choosing for them, but are really in the driver's seat and able to make those decisions and have agency. And I'm wondering if you can talk from just a really pragmatic and practical level about what it takes to design pathway systems that we've been talking about and that really allow students to be in that driver's seat, and that the pathway is embedding ways in which a student is able to be supported in how they are navigating, so that many of the anecdotes actually that we've heard on this webinar that folks have shared from their own personal lived experiences aren't happening for young people.
Sure, Kelly. I do want to say I'm now the former chair of the Community College Board. So just to clarify that, here's what I would say is that we established a clear goal, and that is increasing the likelihood of persistence to completion post-high school for our students, right? So we as a high school district in our work isn't focused on replacing colleges or employer training programs or welding programs. We provide lots of opportunities, but our goal is really to increase the likelihood of persistence after they leave us, because we know that most jobs will require something post high school graduation in order for students to be economically mobile. So we start really with that tagline, it's above my head, discover your future. And what that means is our focus is on exploration and discovery. And so this exposure before choice, that in the past, students many times were waiting until they were 18 and they left high school to figure out, okay, what am I going to do with my life? I think we've all heard those old stories. So what we did was looked at high school as a purposeful step in that path. And by doing that, doing things, practical approaches such as one semester introductory courses that are geared towards understanding the field and the opportunities within a pathway, an intro to business and in the research area or manufacturing or in law, whatever those pathways are, that there's an introductory course. And in fact, you can expect for us in healthcare, half the students who start an intro to healthcare choose to go on to another pathway. That is great. You want these experiences for them to be exploratory and discovery, so they can make better decisions. The other I think strategy is building and leveraging your electives and build those on student interests and your local community opportunities. So if you have a large manufacturing sector like we do, you might start by building your pathway in manufacturing. If you have a big network of health care providers and hospitals, that might be where you begin your work with the pathways. I can't underscore how important and effective career counseling and curriculums are to early exposure for kids to do those high interest surveys and get a sense of what am I good at? Where are my natural talents? Where's my natural interest? For them to know where to begin to explore and consider these elective opportunities. Because in the end of the day, they're still 14 and 15 years old and 16 years old. And then the other one I would say is that work-based learning component. And why it's so important is it really is, aside from all of the benefits and values that we all know exist from work-based learning, it's also another really powerful decision point. That when a student, after they've taken these experiences, maybe they've had early college credit, maybe they've even got a certification, but then when they're with a real employer doing the type of work or in that context, that really helps them decide, oh, wow, I really did not know this or expect this, and they can still make a change. And they can make a change that's informed. Because at the end of the day, the goal is to help students make the most powerful decisions for themselves. That's how they have agency, so that they can make an informed choice about where is the right post-secondary experience for me, whether that's work, a training program, or a specific community college or four-year university, depending on what it is that the student wants to pursue. And the way they figure that out is through all of those experiences and through all of that exploration and trial and error and going deeper in that path.
That's great, Laz. And one thing I would also just put a plug in and encourage folks to do is when you click on those resources that Stephen put into the chat earlier, one of the things that the commission produced is a set of action guides that really get into the how-to. And all of the examples that folks have been mentioning that are really specific, really pragmatic, are in there as well, and in a way that hopefully is really helpful from a utility perspective. Melissa, I want to ask you a question, and then we've had a number of questions coming in from the audience, so I want to make sure we've got time to turn to those. But as is underscored in the conceptual framework and the way in which the components are really braided together, and as is clear in the recommendations, the purpose, belonging, and social capital, what we call the agency components, aren't just nice to haves. They are really essential and are really seen as being the accelerants to supporting students on these purposeful pathways. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about, and again, from a sort of very pragmatic perspective, how do you intentionally integrate those into the programmatic experiences like advising, like accelerated coursework, like career-connected learning, and particularly sort of on the advising side?
Yes, and I'm so glad you used the word essential. You heard me speak earlier to how much the belonging, purpose, and social capital is an essential element to success, to move beyond sort of the access conversation. We had this sort of aha moment halfway through the commission where we recognized that, we built this report on the idea of pathways. And you can identify workforce partners who tell you the fields that are growing, build the accelerated coursework and career-connected learning experiences aligned to them. That's all about the path. But if we don't address the person as well as the path, we will have created a bunch of paths that students aren't convicted about pursuing. And so it was really important that we elevated the work of belonging, purpose, and social capital, because we really need to recognize, like, these are human beings. These are whole children, whole young people with aspirations. And if we don't center on what must be true for them as individuals, then we've done a lot of infrastructure development, which is great, without doing a lot of the people development, which is so essential. And I know there are many counselors, professional practitioners on the ground who understand that the heart work is just as important as the infrastructure and development work and resourcing that we know we need to do. The other just note that I will name, when I think about, how to ensure that purpose, belonging, and social capital are elevated in a way that is truly seen as essential and on par with some of the other work that we've been doing and making progress on over the last couple of decades. Sometimes I think at the end of the day, it really is about answering a couple of very, very simple questions. Like, we know belonging, purpose, and social capital matter, but at the end of the day, where is it supposed to happen in the school day? Sometimes we don't even have an answer to just that. Where is it supposed to happen? Where are we supposed to intentionally build belonging, purpose, and social capital? How is it supposed to be developed? So in other words, like, who's doing it? Have we trained them effectively to do it, so that we're not just focused on the sort of the quantity of these experiences, but all the quality as well? And then last, like, how do we know? And you mentioned some of the resources we built in the action guides. One of the essential components of this was on the measurement and metrics front. And so offering some proposed questions that you could ask young people, surveys that you can provide, ways to really make sure that you're understanding what the reality of every student is. And even that measures and metrics recommendation that we're sharing with the commission, I will also just say at OneGoal, sometimes we're just asking students, how confident are you in the pathway it's actually one of the most reliable indicators for us on longer term completion outcomes for young people, is asking them junior and senior year, how confident are you? Because that confidence gets at the agency that we know is required, and ultimately is a great signal of whether or not students are building belonging, purpose, and social capital. And so in some cases, just asking the simple questions for how we should be thinking about this work is the right place to start.
All right, I am watching the clock and we've got about 10 minutes. And so I'm going to ask a couple of questions to the group. We won't have time for everybody to chime in. So don't wait too long to jump in so we don't waste too much time. But also, no pressure to respond if other colleagues have jumped in first. The first question is just, how can technology, what are ways in which you are seeing technology be enabled to both expand career exposure, but also are there any ways or examples that you all have seen of technology being utilized to help ensure that the adults in the system have time to be doing the really important advising components with young people, and those other things that often get placed on the laps of advisors and administrators, that can be not something that they are having to spend a lot of time and effort thinking and worrying about. So I'll open that up to the group.
Laz, you go first, then I'll jump in.
Okay, so I think it was related to sort of like the utilizing videos and such in the Q&A that I saw. I would say one strategy, I mean, Zoom really, as much as we use it now, it really is a modern invention of just the last few years, where we're able to take a lot of what used to be in person, sort of these panel presentations, bringing experts in. We're now doing it at scale throughout, and we have a career pathways night, and we have many events that we're able to broadcast to the entire community during off hours, and then are still available online for people to watch. In fact, you can go to our website and look up Career Pathways Night. And we have videos along all of our pathways. So that's one strategy we've been able to scale using technology.
And I'll jump in. I think on the career connected learning component, that's where I've seen some of the most exciting opportunities. It is one thing to talk to a young person about having an experience being an ER nurse it is quite another for them to have a VR-based experience of what it's actually like to be an ER nurse. And if you haven't heard of technology apps like that, trust me, they are coming and you will. And so I think there's so much opportunity in that space. Sort of word of caution, but also an additional opportunity. The best technology that I have seen is really focused on removing the administrative barrier to taking on this work as much as possible to free people up to do the relational work. So as a concrete example, some of the work at Georgia State, some of the work that we're doing at OneGoal, what a counselor used to have to navigate to start their day to really look across thousands sometimes of data points, trying to figure out which students we need to prioritize, to instead turn on your computer and say, hey, these are the 3 students that have been flagged overnight for some concern around attendance or around engagement. Here are the students that, said they were going to follow up with application or financial aid and are overdue. Have this kind of conversation with them before the end of the week, right? So taking that burden and that cognitive processing off so that people can be fully present with the student, I think is the best kinds of innovation that I've seen on the tech front.
And I'll just mention briefly, because there's a question about online dual enrollment, and which really can help with access challenges. But at the same time, the question was like, how do we create a sense of belonging? And that's a great question to be asking. And I think like in especially the asynchronous settings, it's really challenging to do. And sometimes you have to make design decisions that if this is not going to promote a sense of belonging in the class, then maybe we should do something different. I think you'd have high expectations of your post-secondary partners and really ground in the student experience. Because I think a lot of this growth is in the asynchronous online dual enrollment, and it's important to stay attuned to students' experiences in those courses.
All right, we've got about 8 minutes, and I'm going to do 2 rapid lightning rounds. So I will do 1 question each round, and we'll ask folks to answer in as pithy a way as possible, while still helpful for our audience. So the first question is, if you could challenge every education and industry leader that might be listening today or has picked up the report to change just one specific practice or handoff starting tomorrow to better support student transitions, what would that one thing be? And Melissa, because I know you're really good at thinking on your feet, I will have you go first, and then we'll just go down the line.
Some research suggests that kids need at least 5 conversations with an adult over the course of their high school experience. That's a math problem you can start to actually operationalize. Figure out the math of 5 conversations, 15 minutes apiece, adult in the building, focus there.
I would say for our higher ed folks to treat their dual enrolled students like they were a student on their campus and in their classroom, and do the same things you do for them.
I'll jump on that because this is also something that District 214 has done well. Instead of having students in college or career programming, put a college accelerated course into all of the sort of career programs to kind of blend that.
And I would just round out to say that I think we've been piloting things for the last decade or so, and I think it's time to move to policy, sort of statewide scale on many of the big ideas. So one I would just share is that we created an Executive Order 10, or the governor did here, which created an Office of Workforce Development, which for the first time connects higher ed, the Department of Labor, and Department of Education, and has multiple staff across. And similar things have happened in Ohio and Texas, et cetera. But the idea is create the actual infrastructure to fill those gaps that John alluded to earlier, so that there's some coherence for students.
All right, and last rapid round. You guys did really well, and this one you're answering either of them, but not both of them. So either, what was one aha moment that you had as you served on the commission that you are taking forward with you, or what is something that is giving you optimism and hope that this is possible, that we can build purposeful pathways for all students?
Besides the number of RSVPs for a conversation like this, like, I mean, I joke, but that's where I opened this call to have 300 people say, hey, this is something I care about. This is the first time in my career, literally for the last 20 years, where it feels like we do all want the same things. We're having the same conversations. We're using the same language around pathways. That's like common vernacular now. Have some same mindsets around no longer having this bifurcated system that is failing our kids. Now it's about how we do the work. So the mindsets are there. They are necessary. Now we need to get to work.
The importance of
Go ahead, John.
The importance of combinations really hit home when I was visiting a high school in December, and they had a great academy program. All the students were doing work-based learning. They had the animal science, they had a cat rescue, and they were playing with cats all day. And the student there wasn't any dual enrollment that was a part of it. And the student was saying, yeah, I think I'm getting some college courses. I think it's like an associate degree or something. And this was like an industry certification. And so that confusion around all these credentials and the sort of importance of combining all of this together connected to students' interests really hit home. And that was at the same time as we were having those more like kind of abstract theoretical conversations.
So I would maybe jump in. So the aha moment during our conversations and doing the design work, some of you folks who are on the panel might remember Lai. And one conversation we were having, she's a self-described artivist, meaning an artist that uses her art to be an activist. And we were talking as a small group about policies and, enabling conditions, et cetera. And I could tell she was sort of death scrolling in her mind. She was just sort of like drifting from the table. And so I said, how are you doing? And she goes, I have no idea what you guys are talking about. I'm just, interested in how do I make a difference in my community? And really just underscored for me the importance of that sense of purpose, belonging, and social capital. Like that was really what resonated with her and underscored for me, even though it's a little bit more difficult to measure, how important it was.
All right. And Laz, close this home. You have about 30 seconds.
Yeah, so I thought the only people that could implement or make this change is the principal or superintendent. And my aha was that the unit of change really is the community, and any leader in the community can get this work started.
Thank you all. Melissa, I will hand it back to you for a quick closing.
So first, just gratitude for you, Kelly, for organizing us on the commission and organizing us throughout this webinar. So appreciate your thoughtfulness. And then I just wanted to give you all an opportunity to follow up and connect with us. So whether it's on the topic of policy and systems change, research and data trends, district level implementation, or all of the above, please just let us know where you want to hear more. You've heard lots of experts who have different areas of expertise here, and we want to make sure to connect you to the right people, the right players, and that might include some follow-up with individuals from today's panel, and certainly will include some resources as a way to make sure that this is part of many conversations we have to move this work forward. Please continue to follow OneGoal on social media, visit our website, learn more about the work that we are specifically doing, and thank you to the team who is behind the scenes that made this all look a lot easier than it actually is. So appreciate the care that you all are demonstrating for our young people day in and day out. I wish you the absolute best of luck. Our kids really need us to win at this, and I'm confident we will. Have a great day.